I never thought my grandmother's funeral would be remembered for anything other than her quiet grace. She had lived a long life, more than 80 years, steady and soft-spoken, the kind of woman who sewed quilts by hand and saved grocery receipts in neat little envelopes. But instead of leaving the church in mourning, I left with my stomach in knots and my name dragged through the mud. It happened the moment the priest closed his book, and people started filing toward the reception hall. I was standing near the casket, hands clasped, when my sister Sophia strutted forward in her black heels, smiling as though she were at a gala instead of a funeral. She carried a slim folder, the kind of legal folder, with a brass clasp, and before I could even guess what was inside, she snapped it open for everyone to see. "Half of your $1 million condo is mine," she declared, her voice sharp enough to cut through the hush of the room. "Family helps family, Evelyn." The words hit me like cold water. I froze. The folder in her hands glinted under the dim light. Around us the air shifted. Cousins stopped whispering. My uncle set down his coffee cup. My own parents, who had barely spoken to me for 6 years, nodded faintly, as though they had rehearsed this moment. For a second I thought I might faint. That apartment, my apartment, had cost me every ounce of discipline I had ever known. I had lived lean-saved bonuses, skipped vacations, worked nights and weekends. At 29, when I finally signed the deed to that penthouse unit overlooking the Hudson, I cried in relief. And now, here on the day we were supposed to honor the woman who taught us dignity, my sister reduced it all to a bargaining chip. I tightened my grip on the envelope of condolence letters I had been holding. My knuckles whitened, no one noticed. Silence stretched. Then came the laughter, thin, nervous, from the back pew. A cousin muttered, "Well, she does have debts," another voice chimed. "Family should share." My cheeks burned. I felt alone in that hall, even though it was filled with people who shared my blood. The loneliness was almost calm. I wanted to step outside into the autumn air, pretend none of it was happening. Yet the next moment brought something worse. Sophia leaned close, her perfume stinging my nose. "You were always the selfish one," she whispered, loud enough for the first row to hear. "Grandma would want you to do the right thing." The right thing. That phrase had been the leash around my neck since childhood. I forced myself to stand still, though. Inside I was unraveling. People clinked glasses in the adjoining hall as if nothing had happened. A choir of false cheer covering the cracks in our family's foundation. I pressed the envelope tighter against my chest. "I will explain more soon. This part matters. For now, I want to ask you something. Tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to hit subscribe. We need to talk about families and money." When I walked out of the chapel into the cold air, I felt like a stranger at my own family's gathering. People were talking about casseroles and carpool schedules, but all I could hear was my sister's voice echoing in my head. "Half of your condo is mine." I should tell you something about my family so you understand why those words cut so deep. 6 years ago, we stopped speaking. Not with a fight that blew up one afternoon, but with a slow, deliberate break. My parents chose my sister, and I was left behind. Back then, Sophia had begged me for money, large sums, not the casual $50 for gas. She wanted seed capital for her husband's new venture, another of his bold ideas that always promised millions, but never reached the finish line. At the time, I had just started earning a respectable salary in finance, and I was saving every penny for a place of my own. I told her no kindly at first, then firmly. The reaction was swift. My parents accused me of being cold-hearted, ungrateful. "Family helps family," my father repeated as if it were gospel. That night, I was told to leave their house and not come back until I learned generosity. The door closed behind me, and for years it stayed that way. In those years, I lived quietly. I built my career as an analyst, pulling long hours under the glow of office lights. I took the subway home to a rented studio, ate pasta from a single pan, and checked my savings account like a farmer watching his crops. Every raise, every bonus, went straight into that account. I wanted security, a place of my own where no one could threaten me with eviction, a place where the key would rest only in my hand. By 29, I had it. A penthouse unit in a high-rise overlooking the river, valued at nearly $1 million. I signed the papers myself, held the deed myself, and toasted the empty room with a glass of cheap wine. It wasn't just real estate, it was proof that hard work could give me what family never had. And now, here at the funeral, they had returned. My parents greeted me as though 6 years were 6 minutes. My mother's lipstick smile stretched across her face, but her eyes flicked toward Sophia's folder. My father clapped my shoulder a little too hard, whispering, "This is your chance to make things right." Right for whom? Certainly not for me. Then came the whispers, the cousins gathering in clusters like clouds forming a storm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification. Against my better judgment, I checked it. It was a screenshot of a Facebook post already gathering comments. A post from Sophia herself. In it, she wrote, "So grateful my sister promised to help us with her condo. Grandma always said, family comes first." My heart sank. She had staged the scene. She had planted the idea in everyone's mind before even confronting me. The post was public, shared by relatives, spreading like fire across dry grass. By the time dessert was served in the reception hall, half the family believed I had already agreed. I sat alone at a round table near the edge of the room. No one came near. Plates clattered glasses, lifted laughter, rose and fell. I felt like wallpaper, present but unseen. But what they didn't know was that I had kept every email, every message from the past proof of how they had abandoned me. I didn't show it, not yet. I folded my napkin slowly, kept my face calm, while inside the betrayal settled deeper like a splinter under skin. I'll tell you what came next in a moment. By the time night fell, the funeral had shifted into what felt like a tribunal. The room smelled of coffee and lilies, and all eyes were on me. I wasn't Evelyn the granddaughter anymore. I was Evelyn, the owner of a condo worth nearly $1 million. That title seemed to weigh heavier than my name. My parents were the first to corner me. They led me into a side room where framed photos of my grandmother lined the walls. My father spoke quickly as though afraid I might walk away. "Your sister owes $150,000, he said, gripping the edge of a chair. "She's drowning. Creditors are calling. You have the means to help." My mother chimed in, her tone sweet but sharp. "Think of how this looks. You're living high in that penthouse while your family suffers." I let them talk, let the guilt roll over me, but I didn't bend. "That home is mine," I answered finally. My voice was low, but it carried. I worked for it. No one else did. Their faces hardened. My mother's lips pressed tight. My father's eyes dimmed with disappointment. In that moment, I realized nothing had changed in 6 years. They still believed my worth was measured by what I could give to Sophia. When I left the room, whispers followed me. Cousins gave sidelong glances, and Aunt shook her head. The narrative had shifted. I was no longer grieving. I was selfish. Then came the email. My phone buzzed during dinner, and when I opened it, I nearly dropped the device. It was from Sophia, but not addressed to me. It was addressed to the entire extended family. "Dear everyone, I am heartbroken. Evelyn refuses to honor the promise she made to help. I never wanted to bring this into the open, but her lack of compassion leaves me no choice. Please keep us in your prayers." Attached was a photo of her with one hand on her belly as though she were carrying a child. The caption implied sacrifice, suffering, desperation. I stared at it, sickened. She wasn't pregnant. I knew that. But many of our relatives didn't. Within minutes, the email began to ripple outward. Phones buzzed across the hall. I could see heads bending together, see screens lighting up with my sister's fabricated story. And every glance they shot me grew heavier, more accusing. It was a masterstroke of manipulation. She wasn't just demanding money, she was painting me as a villain. Betrayal wasn't a knife in the back. It was a billboard on the wall flashing for all to see. I sat at the long table fork untouched as plates of roast beef and potatoes passed by. Around me the noise swelled. Jokes, laughter, stories of old times. None of it reached me. I was invisible except for the shame stitched to my name. But here is what they didn't know. I had seen Sophia pull stunts before. Credit cards in other people's names, stories that bent truth until it snapped debts she blamed on chance. And I had learned to keep records. Bank statement screenshots, massages, key little shields stacked away. I didn't raise them that night. Not yet. Some battles are lost on purpose just to see who reveals their hand. The weight of their judgment pressed against me, but I sat still. And as I looked at the faces around that table, faces that once meant home, I understood something for the first time. Family can betray you faster than any stranger. And sometimes the wound isn't the betrayal itself, but how quickly everyone else believes the lie. The reception hall smelled faintly of wine and wax polish when Sophia made her next move. I had barely touched my plate, my fork resting uselessly on a piece of chicken gone cold. Around me, relatives clinked glasses and tapped spoons against dessert bowls. The atmosphere was forced cheer people, pretending this was a gathering of love instead of tension. Then I heard her clear her throat. Sophia stood near the head table, her black dress fitted perfectly, her hair gleaming under the overhead lights. She held her phone in her hand, raised slightly the red light of recording, visible even from across the room. "I want everyone to hear this," she said, smiling directly into her screen. "Tonight we're talking about what family really means. Isn't that right, Evelyn?" Dozens of heads turned toward me. I felt the blood rush to my ears. My first instinct was to look away, but she moved closer, pointing the camera straight at me. "Here's the truth," she continued, her voice gaining that dramatic tone she loved to use. "My sister lives in a condo worth nearly $1 million while her family struggles. She has the power to change everything for us, but she refuses. Can you believe that?" The phone caught every angle, every uncomfortable face in the room. My father shifted in his chair but didn't stop her. My mother pressed her lips together, neither approving nor intervening. The silence of their inaction was its own kind of consent. "You're nothing without us," Sophia sneered, words sharp enough to sting, even before they left her mouth. "Sign the deed or watch your family turn their back on you." The cruelty wasn't new, but the performance was. She was broadcasting it, live streaming, humiliation for anyone to watch. Within minutes, cousins pulled out their own phones, sharing the link, laughing nervously. The number of viewers climbed in real-time, digits spinning like a slot machine. I sat frozen, my napkin balled tightly in my fist. The urge to shout back burned inside me, but something stronger held me still. A calmness that came only from years of surviving their scorn. I told myself, let her have her stage. But what they didn't know was that I had a stage of my own waiting. In my purse rested a small silver USB drive. On it were documents, real ones, signed and stamped the last will of our grandmother. It proved what Sophia would never admit: the apartment and the inheritance were mine alone. She had known it, yet she gambled on spectacle, thinking the louder her voice, the quicker the world would believe her. The laughter of the guests rose, blending with the ding of incoming notifications. Sophia was basking in it, turning her humiliation into theater, grinning for the lens as if the room were her audience and I her villain. I lifted my water glass, steadying my hand. If I had spoken, then it would have been lost in the noise. Better to let her sink deeper, to let the world see her cruelty, without me lifting a word in defense. I thought of my grandmother, the woman whose funeral had become a circus. She had once told me, "Truth has a way of waiting. It doesn't shout, it endures." That memory steadied me now. So I sat still, tears pricking the corners of my eyes, and let Sophia carry on with her show. My silence made her louder, her glee sharper. By the time the live stream ended, more than 100,000 strangers had watched her turn my grief into entertainment. And yet deep in my pocket, the truth waited. I'll show you what happened next, but not just yet. This part deserves its own telling. The night after the funeral felt like a blur of whispered voices and buzzing phones. I barely slept, not from guilt, but from the steady thrum of betrayal. When dawn broke, I knew I could not let her performance go unanswered. If Sophia wanted an audience, she would get one, only this time the script would not be hers. The following evening, the family gathered again for a private dinner at my aunt's house. Candles flickered on the long oak table, casting shadows on faces that avoided mine. The humiliation from the live stream still lingered. I could see it in the way cousins whispered and in the way my parents couldn't meet my eyes. I arrived late, carrying nothing but my purse. Inside was the silver USB drive, small and unremarkable, yet heavier than gold in my hand. Sophia was already in the center of the room, glass in hand, her smile too wide. "Glad you could join us," she said, her voice dripping with false warmth. "Maybe tonight you'll reconsider, Evelyn." I did not answer. Instead, I set my purse down, unzipped it slowly, and pulled out my laptop. A murmur spread around the table. People leaned closer, confused. "What are you doing?" my mother asked, her tone brittle. I pressed the USB into the port and let the screen glow across the room. A document appeared: my grandmother's last will and testament. Stamped, notarized, undeniable. "Read it," I said softly, but the firmness in my voice silenced even the clinking of cutlery. My aunt adjusted her glasses and read aloud. "I leave my estate, including the penthouse property, solely to my granddaughter Evelyn. No other claims are to be considered." The words echoed, bouncing off the walls. My father's face drained of color. My mother covered her mouth. Sophia's smile cracked, then crumbled. "This is fake," she hissed, stepping closer. "She's lying." But before she could finish, I clicked on a second file, A video recording of my grandmother, frail but clear, speaking directly into the camera. Her voice carried more weight than any paper ever could. I know who will cherish what I leave behind. It is Evelyn. The others have taken enough. This is my final word. The silence that followed was absolute. No one could deny it. The truth was not only written, it was spoken. Sophia's phone slipped from her hand, clattering to the floor. Someone in the corner stifled a gasp. My cousin muttered, "She lied to us." And then, as if fate itself enjoyed irony, a guest at the far end lifted their own phone and began to record. Not out of malice, but out of shock. The video captured Sophia's stunned face, the will glowing on the screen, the betrayal unveiled in real time. Within hours, it was on TikTok, spreading faster than her livestream ever had. 2 million views by morning, comment sections filled with strangers condemning her cruelty, praising the quiet strength I had shown. Justice served at the dinner table, one caption read. My sister had tried to make me a villain. Now the world saw her for what she truly was. I closed the laptop gently, slid the USB back into my purse, and stood. My voice was steady as I looked around the table. Respect is not begged for, it is earned, and you've all shown me where yours lies. I left before anyone could answer. Behind me, the silence was heavier than any insult they had thrown. The days that followed were like watching dominoes fall, one after another, each toppled by the force of truth. I didn't need to lift a finger. The internet had become my loudest ally. The video from that dinner spread far beyond our family. Strangers dissected every detail, the tremor in Sophia's voice, the iron calm in mine, the stamp on the will, even the look of defeat on my parents' faces. It turned into a viral case study of what people called toxic kinship. 2 million views turned into 3, then 5. Commentators on podcasts spoke about it. Bloggers wrote headlines, "When Greed Meets Proof, the Penthouse Scandal." Meanwhile, my sister's carefully crafted image began to crumble. For years, she had posed online as the doting wife of a businessman, sharing glossy photos of brunches and borrowed luxury cars. But after the video, followers started digging. They uncovered unpaid loans, bounced checks, and the pattern of debt that had shadowed her every venture. Her so-called friends distanced themselves overnight. Business partners withdrew. One even issued a public statement. "We were misled. We will no longer associate with Sophia." Her phone calls, once constant and demanding, fell silent. I had expected her to fight back, to craft another performance. Instead, she sank into bitterness. She posted cryptic messages about betrayal, about being misunderstood, but the audience she once commanded now laughed at her. Screenshots of her rants became memes. The humiliation she had planned for me had turned into her own. I didn't stop there. Quietly, I passed the full collection of evidence to my lawyer. Every fabricated email, every post where she implied I had promised money, every record of her false pregnancy claims. He assured me the case was clear: attempted fraud, defamation, even harassment. "You're in the right," he said, tapping the folder, "and now it's in the system." The knowledge steadied me. I didn't gloat publicly. I didn't need to. The spectacle spoke louder than I ever could. Instead, I chose a quieter strike. I uploaded a single image to our family group chat, a still frame of the will, stamped and signed with the words, "Respect is earned, not demanded." I didn't add a single sentence more. No one replied. Not my mother, not my father, not the cousins who had once parroted Sophia's pleas. The silence in that chat was louder than any argument. It was the sound of their certainty collapsing. Still, the public had plenty to say. Messages poured into my inbox. Some were from strangers sharing their own stories of greedy relatives. Others were from people thanking me for standing firm. A few even offered job opportunities, saying they admired the way I had handled the pressure. In a strange way, Sophia's betrayal had freed me. By trying to shame me in front of the world, she had accidentally shown the world exactly who she was and who I was not. One evening, standing by my window overlooking the river, I scrolled through the countless messages. I thought of my grandmother, her steady hands folding fabric, her quiet words of wisdom. She had left me the apartment, yes, but more than that, she had left me the reminder that dignity requires no stage. And now, without raising my voice, without spending a dime, I had shown my family that revenge doesn't always come in fire. Sometimes it comes in silence, and in truth made public. It didn't take long for the weight of exposure to crush them. My parents, who once carried themselves with the pride of respectability, now walked into church with lowered eyes. Neighbors whispered, Old friends crossed the street instead of offering greetings. The humiliation of siding with Sophia, of demanding I give up what was legally and morally mine, stained their reputation in ways I don't think they ever imagined. I heard through relatives that my mother cried often, not out of remorse for how they treated me, but out of shame that others finally saw it. My father tried to save face, telling anyone who would listen that it was all a misunderstanding, that family disagreements were normal. But the clip had been viewed by millions. The evidence was beyond denial. Sophia's fall was sharper. The debts she had hidden for years surfaced quickly once her credibility shattered. Creditors who once tolerated her excuses came demanding payment. The bank issued warnings. Her husband, the so-called entrepreneur, quietly packed his things and disappeared. I later learned he had taken what little savings they had left and fled to another state. She was left in a small apartment with unpaid bills stacked on the counter. Friends who once tagged her in glittering dinner photos now blocked her account. Her name became shorthand for deceit in our circles. Don't pull a Sophia, one cousin joked, and though cruel, it wasn't untrue. What struck me most was how the family, once eager to defend her, slowly retreated. Aunts who had scolded me began to soften their tone, sending half-hearted messages about reconciliation. Cousins who had sided with her now sent quiet apologies. But their words rang hollow. Where were they when the lies were loudest? Where were they when Sophia humiliated me in front of strangers? Meanwhile, Sophia herself grew desperate. She created new social media accounts, tried to reframe the narrative, painting herself as a victim of online bullying. But the internet has a long memory, and the truth of that dinner recording always resurfaced. Comments piled beneath her posts. You tried to steal from your own sister. Greed destroys everything. Every time I saw those words, I didn't smile or cheer. I simply felt a quiet sense of justice. Revenge, when it finally settles, doesn't feel like fireworks. It feels like balance restored. I focused on my own life, my work, my apartment, my peace, yet I couldn't help but notice how much attention strangers continued to give the scandal. Podcasts dissected it. Articles called it a modern parable of inheritance and betrayal. Even college students analyzed it in essays about family greed. I became unwillingly a symbol. And though I never sought fame, I couldn't ignore the ripple effect. My inbox filled with stories from people I had never met. Brothers cheated out of wills, daughters cut off for refusing to pay siblings' debts, mothers disowned for protecting their savings. Their words made me realize this wasn't just my story. It was the story of countless others who had been silenced by the heavy hand of family obligation. And Sophia, she had given me the platform to tell it. By trying to ruin me, she had ended up exposing herself and amplifying voices like mine. Sometimes betrayal creates its own punishment. Sometimes you don't need to lift a finger. The guilty trip on their own lies and the world watches them fall. Months passed and the noise around the scandal slowly dimmed. The internet moved on to new outrages, new spectacles. But in my life, the echo remained. My phone still held the videos, the messages, the evidence of a family that tried to take what was mine. Sometimes on sleepless nights, I scrolled through them not to relive the pain, but to remind myself how far I had come. The penthouse became my sanctuary. Each morning, I opened the curtains to watch the river, catch the light, a reminder that I had built this life with my own hands. No one else's labor, no one else's sacrifice, just mine. I furnished the rooms, slowly choosing pieces that reflected not wealth, but peace, a worn leather chair by the window shelves lined with books. My grandmother once loved a quilt she stitched, folded neatly at the foot of my bed. I thought of her often. She had been quiet, almost invisible in family disputes, but she had left her truth in writing, in her will and in her recorded words. By choosing me, she gave me not just an inheritance, but a shield. And in her absence, I finally understood her wisdom. Silence can be stronger than shouting. My parents never apologized. Pride held their tongues. They called once awkwardly to ask about the weather, to ask about work, as though the wound between us were nothing more than a scratch. I answered politely but distantly. I had no anger left, only distance, and distance was enough. Sophia tried too. One afternoon she sent a text. We should talk. People don't understand my side. I stared at it for a long time, then set the phone down without replying. Some conversations serve no purpose. Some bridges burn so thoroughly that to rebuild them would only invite collapse. Instead, I turned outward. I began to share small parts of my story, not for revenge, but for connection. I spoke at a community event about financial independence. about setting boundaries with family. A local paper quoted me, "Sometimes family is just a word. Respect is what truly matters." That line spread farther than I expected. And the comments that followed were not about my sister's greed anymore. They were about resilience, about the right to protect what you earn, about how love without respect is just possession. In a strange way, the ordeal gave me a voice I didn't know I had. One evening, as winter settled over the city, I stepped out onto my balcony. The air was sharp, the skyline glittering like scattered jewels. Below me, the river moved steadily indifferent to human drama. I wrapped myself in my grandmother's quilt and let the quiet sink in. Revenge, I realized, is not always fire and fury. Sometimes it is as gentle as living well, as steady as refusing to bend, as powerful as standing alone and knowing you are enough. So if you think I made the right choice, comment right. If you have a better way, share your idea. Families and money, they test us more than we ever expect. And with that, my story rests.